Hello. So we're going to check out what should be doing. Which ones are we doing?
It helps supports the creation of exclusive
So this side. Just checking, after the usually gulf which manual rates which is being requested, and 2 years to Benjamin Mandel open connection. All right, here.
When you are a student that is an LGBTQ, and every day for the rest of your school life, you go to the same group of people who will insult you, who will demean you, who will call you different on the basis of your sexuality and only on that, and undermine your worth as a human being, the isolation you will experience is tremendous. And we on government side stand to stop that. When the state cannot protect you, ladies and gentlemen, it has to support you through private institutions and structural systems to combat a conservative context. And therefore, we have to understand that given that trends do not exist, given that the conservative context continues to discriminate against individuals day to day within the school context, what then is our proposal? It's very simple. We're going to create exclusive schools that for students that identify themselves as LGBTQs. It comes in two clarifications. Firstly, this means we're going to create exclusive subsidized schools by the state for students who see themselves as part of the sexuality. And usually, they're self-identified, we can target them and we know them. They're able to apply for these schools who volunteer to them. We're going to allow them the voluntary processes. The trend here is an example is in Illinois, where we start to make these schools already within these different contexts to protect them from other bullies, right? And secondly, the second clarification is this. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not willing to defend that we're going to keep them isolated from the rest of society forever, right? We think that's an unreasonable burden to say that we're creating prisons for them. But what we are going to defend from government side is that the nuancing to education is simple, that within the school context, within the classroom different size context, we must be able to create a conducive learning environment for them, which is the most priority of the school in this situation. Two standards to prove who's going to win this debate. Firstly, what are the purpose of schools and who is the best, which policy best forwards it? And secondly, how do we best protect the LGBTQ and in these situations, also the children, right? I have two arguments to prove why this is going to be true. Firstly, on how LGBT schools provide the most conducive learning environment, and secondly, on how these schools provide the most effective support systems. No, thank you. Let's go to the first argument on how LGBTQ schools provide the most conducive learning environment. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to realize the status quo is currently ineffective to fulfill its purpose of schools, right? We think the first problem is that there's a lack of support systems within these schools, a lack of the process of the application of anti-bullying programs that are able to support it. We think it's ineffective for them to say that anti-bullying programs work, right? Because oftentimes they don't. Because even within the context within the classroom, you're still going to be discriminated. How? It's always going to be an isolation within recess, within lunch, within all these different breaks, within group projects, which will always say that you're different. You're always going to hear in your mind these different jokes that say you are a faggot, with these jokes that say that you are someone that is different because you're not straight, because you're someone that doesn't conform to the rest of society. And obviously, in your mind, even though there's no efficient, or even though there's no tangible physical abuse, you're always going to experience something that is emotional. You're always going to experience something that makes you different and that harms your ability to learn. How? If you're going to be within your classroom and trying to solve 1 + 1, and all you're going to be thinking about is trying to conform and trying to become straight, because you're in your mind, you're going to be judged with whatever you do, with every single action you have. You're not going to be thinking about what your grades are. You're not going to be thinking about your education, because always, every day when you go to school, you're always going to be prioritizing how you're going to act in front of everyone else. Therefore, when you look at the priority of a school, it's not just about whether or not you're going to be integrated with the rest of everyone, and that's not the priority of a school, but it is to be able to make sure that you're going to learn, to have your education, to be able to grow up and have this education so that you can get a job in the future and be able to get a good future and ensure that for yourself. When you have this type of system in the status quo of discrimination, and which always hampers your ability to learn, which always gets into your mind and ingrains in yourself that you cannot be able to integrate with the rest of everyone else because you are inherently different, then you need to be able to separate that. How do schools do this? Obviously, if you have an LGBTQ school with people who can relate to each other, who can always be able to be in each other's schools in their own context, then we think that all these different people who obviously discriminate against them are not going to be beside them within a context in learning math, in learning all these different subjects in this context, and that there is the conclusion of this argument. Why? Before my second argument, yes.
So then why not we make schools especially for short people, for African Americans, for Muslims in certain contexts where they are discriminated as well? How are LGBT people special?
We do that in the status quo. There are different schools anyways, where we have schools specifically for Christians, schools specifically for Muslims. We think that is a trend in the context, and that's exactly where we move on to the second argument, on how these schools provide the most effective support systems. What this argument means is very simple. When you are in a community with people who have common experiences and common interests in the growing up process in your formative years, as a student, as a child, you will find certain uniqueness in yourself, a certain idea that you are someone that is special for your own community, right? What are examples of this when we do it in the status quo? As I said to you earlier, we do this making schools on the basis of your sex, such that boys can have their own schools, girls can have their own schools in their private institutions effectively. Or more concretely, also on the basis of your ethnicity. When you look at schools like in the Philippines, like Immaculate Conception Academy, it's for specific people who are in the Filipino Chinese ethnicity, and they can have their own traditions, they can have their own different festivals within their own schools, which identify themselves as their own unique different group or different community, right? And that has a special implication for you, that when you as yourself identify yourself as part of the LGBTQ people and movement, then you have to be part of these different festivals, have to be part of these different gay pride parades, which make you unique to yourself and find meaning in who you are. And this is always specifically important within a school, because in growing up, in being to recognize what's so special about you, then you need to be able to understand that you're not someone who has to conform to the rest of society like people tell you to do, but you have to be able to recognize as your own specific community, which is unique, which is important, which is always inherently very important in these different cases. Why is this so important? Because as I said to you earlier, rooting back to the purpose of schools, we need to be able to understand that when you grow up, you need to understand that you're unique and someone that is special to yourself. And for all these reasons and more, because we concretely allow them to learn productively and we concretely allow them to grow up effectively, I am very proud to propose this motion.
Keep this one 7 minutes and 11 seconds. All right, let's go.
Mr. Speaker, we believe that these LGBT people are people who want to be accepted in society. We believe that these LGBT people shouldn't be isolated from society because they want to be accepted by society, not getting more segregated and more filtered from society. The stance coming from opposite side is very simple. Firstly, we don't support the construction of these exclusive schools. Secondly, we don't support the segregation of these LGBTs from society. But before that, a few rebuttals against government side. I have 3 rebuttals. Firstly, they told us that there will be less bullying and there will be a conducive environment because the quality of education in status quo is not that good. Incorrect. 2 levels to this. Firstly, bullying will always happen and bullying cannot be depleted. Placing them in another place doesn't make bullying non-existent. Manifesting or creating another special school for them won't deplete, won't help bullying. Let's say if it's a blind school or maybe a school for ADHD, if you place these disabled people into all these other schools, will the bullying stop? The bullying won't stop. They will still be labeled as society as people who are unable or people who are not accepted sit down. But secondly, isolation is even more tremendous under your paradigm, because now you're labeling them and now you're stereotyping them as people who are not accepted in society or people who are unnormal. People who are unnormal, that's why you have to place them, you have to isolate them. You're saying that they're going to be bullied, right? But now you're saying that they need special needs. Everybody in school are also discriminated. Everyone in school are also bullied. There are people who are short, there are people who are black. These people are also discriminated. These people are also bullied. Why make it so special for these homosexuals? Because because so happens they also get bullied, but everyone in status quo and everyone in school also gets bullied. Sit down. But next, they talk second rebuttal. They talked about there's a lack of support systems, right? So that, and then in exclusive schools, there'll be people that can relate to them. Incorrect. Firstly, there are a lot of counseling programs in status quo already. There are also anti-bullying campaigns that also help to support these LGBT people, right? Because if LGBT people cannot cope with the environment, there are counselors. There are people who will give them guidance. The parents are there. There are anti-bullying programs, right? Sit down. But secondly, are you saying that LGBTs don't exist in normal schools? Because there are also other LGBTs living in current status quo that people can relate to each other. If you're saying there's not enough support system for them, then that's false, right? Because there are already enough LGBT people in the school to cope. You won't have to segregate them. You don't have to put them in a special environment. But last rebuttal, when they say that student student educates uniqueness, right? For person to show that uniqueness. We're not saying that uniqueness you cannot show your own uniqueness. Even in current status quo, you can be gay. You can be openly gay, because if you don't do that, if you segregate them on your side, now society won't be socially acceptable to these people. Since they are already isolated, it's a social norm that these gays are not accepted in society, that these gays are stereotyped as bad people. Before I move on, yes.
The main fact is going to be that we already have other differences from historic people and society. That the difference with being gay is that it's something internal. It's the same rhetoric why the school creates religion-specific schools.
People create religion-specific schools because they want to learn about the religion. They don't want to learn other religions, right? Okay. What are you talking about? Okay, you talk about how people that is internal and all those kind of nonsense. That's not relevant. But moving on to my first argument on the principle of why this policy is not justified. Firstly, what is the nature of LGBTs? Now, LGBTs are people with different sexual preferences, right? But secondly, they prefer themselves as normal and they prefer themselves to be a synergy towards society. They want these two things. Firstly, they want to be accepted within society. That means they want to be integrated within society, where they can openly show their gayness, where they want to openly be accepted by society. And secondly, they do not want to be discriminated by society, and they want society to socially accept them. So how would government's policy detriment the status quo, and how would it make it worse? Sit down. Firstly, since LGBTs are now filtered from society, as long as LGBTs are non-existent in normal schools, society won't learn to accept them. Because society won't know how being gay is different, how a person is being gay. Because since through their proposal, all of the gays are in another school now. Society won't be able to accept them. It won't be a social norm. But my next argument on why they propagate segregation. Now, what happens when these schools are manifested and these schools are generated? Three things will happen. Firstly, this will label these LGBT people as unnormal and they need special needs, right? Because now the government say they are unfit for society and they don't want them to associate them with straight people. And now these people are unnormal, right? Sit down. But secondly, this will create an easier target for the bullies, because now you're collecting them all into one area where the vicinity of the area is only gays. You create them an avenue for these bullies to even bullying them, rather than the normal status quo where these LGBT people are scattered around in status quo. Because we believe that bullying can never stop. Under your paradigm, you make the bullying worse. Sit down. But in your proposal, since all these gays are collected under one area, now this creates bullies to give easier targeted attacks on them. We make it easier for them to target who is gay and who is not gay, so I can bully them, all these homophobic people. But lastly, you create avenues for people to coerce them, because now you're saying that, okay, look, there are already exclusive schools for you, you don't belong in this school, you should get out of this school, we don't accept you, because that's what they're trying to propose, right? So will LGBT students be compelled to go within schools? We believe that these LGBT people will be compelled to go to these exclusive schools. Why? Because firstly of peer pressure. Since of course there's peer pressure and society, since your US government is also supporting that these people are not accepted as society, we believe that now these people, all the LGBT people will go to these exclusive schools. US government is not supposed to say that, look, they cannot be accepted society, therefore they have to be isolated. Sit down. US government has to say this. US government has to support that they can be accepted within society, that there will be no isolation within society. But secondly, the fact that these people want to be open about their feelings means that people in society knows that they are gay. Since they know they are gay, since they know that they are gay, people will start forcing them to saying that, no, you don't belong in this school, you are gay, we will not socially accept you, right? In conclusion, what I've stated today, I've stated that firstly, LGBT people want to be open, people want to be open about their gayness, so that these people should be integrated within society, not not isolated within society from exclusive schools. They have society, through that, society will learn to accept them, society will learn about their ways. We're not saying that it will completely accept them, we're trying to gain as much of a marginal benefit as we can through the status quo. We're trying to gain as much of a marginal benefit for society to learn to accept them. If they are segregated, what happens next? If they are isolated, society won't learn about these people, they won't know their social norm. They will be segregated, they will be discriminated, and they won't be accepted by society. They won't be what they wanted to be in that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this isn't a debate about whether or not we want integration of the LGBT community, because we both realize that we all want that on both sides. The debate then is, when is the proper time for us to be able to put these LGBT to the full extent of the public sphere? We think on their side, we're putting them in the public sphere where people are still intolerant, where people still hate them, and people are still homophobic. We think we have to wait for the right time for the people we're going to expose these LGBT kids into are tolerant and mature, and we think that's after they graduate from our schools. I'm going to be talking about two things today. Firstly, on our frame of strategic integration, how it's better for them to grow into these schools, to develop, and when they grow up, feel that they are accepted by more mature adults, because toleration grows with growth, right? But secondly, I'm going to be talking about on the level of the house, how it creates more better family dynamic when parents no longer have to suppress their child's sexuality to make them feel normal. But before that, I have 4 points of rebuttal to government's case. Firstly, they tell us that bullying is an endemic reality. It happens everywhere. 2 points of response. Firstly, so then why is it that on your model, you're putting them on a sphere where they're probably more vulnerable to bullying? They didn't even give us a proper mechanism to exactly how they're going to stop this bullying. Secondly, he told us, and this is and secondly, we have to put a comparison exactly where are we better off. Given that bullying is an endemic reality, we don't think we should be placing them in those schools, but rather we should be placing them in workplaces after they graduate, because that's when people are more tolerant of them, that's when people are more mature. Secondly, he gives us this prop that he didn't even properly explain on anti-bullying programs. Mr. Chair, when we look at the trends of preschoolers who are put into these anti-bullying programs, we see that it is barely feasible for these young kids to understand. Because when you tell a preschooler that these gay people are normal, it's going to be hard for him to understand. You have to wait for these people to mature. It's when you're high school that you start realizing, hey, these are kids too. But when you're putting these people in a sphere, when these preschoolers who are straight are put in a sphere, and we're trying to convince them that LGBT people are normal, we don't think that will happen, and therefore we think their prop doesn't actually work. Thirdly, it also says that integration is more likely when you can relate to them. Mr. Chair, that's totally true, right? And we totally agree with that. But we also say that tolerance comes with maturity. And we don't think that the people they're putting them and exposing them to are tolerant of them, and we think that's incredibly harmful pragmatically and emotionally for these homosexual kids. Fourthly, it tells us that given that we're putting them in schools, they're going to be more stereotyped and we're going to target them more. Mr. Chair, the very fact that they're gay means that they are gay. We don't think that putting them in a school makes them any more different. In fact, it's even more worse in their paradigm, because the fact that you're gay in a crowd of straight people makes it even worse for you to target them. If you want to talk about physical harm, it's more possible to happen on their side. So now on that first point, on strategic integration. No, thank you. We have to realize that children, especially preschoolers that they're putting them in, are less mature than adults. We say that growing up means becoming more mature and tolerant of other people who are of different ethnicities, of different sexuality orientation than yours. Because you're more experienced, you are more exposed to different experiences and narratives of these people, through the media, through other things, and through your friends. Why is it harmful for LGBT children on their paradigm to be fully integrated into the public sphere now? We say that given that the children that they're exposing them to are immature, they won't feel equal. And I think that's an incredible contradiction to the role of the state and the role of the LGBT community to place them in a sphere where they won't feel equal. We also see that it disrupts the process of their acceptance of their sexuality. And we go back to our Prime Minister's case, where he told you that the development of a child to accept his sexuality is incredibly disrupted in these situations where they are bullied by homophobic children. We think that's incredibly harmful, and therefore we should go with our paradigm. Why? Why is our side better? Because we release them to the full extent of the public sphere when straight people are more tolerant, when straight people are more mature, when straight people are adults in the workplace. We think, Mr. Chair, that it's in the workplace and other places after they graduate that they are more likely to be integrated and to feel equal, and we think that's something that states should support. It's something that the LGBT community should support. But before I go on to my second point, I'd like to take over.
Are you saying that when an LGBT student is isolated from society, therefore the LGBT student will be more acceptable by society?
Yes, Mr. Chair, because when you're in a school and you're like not bullied, and then you look at these other kids, we say, Mr. Chair, that one, you no longer have these kids being physically bullied in these situations, but secondly, we also have these children being, after they graduate, having a better sense of who they are and feeling equal. And that's incredibly better on our side. Please tell me what the benefit of your dystopia is. So secondly, how it creates the better family dynamic when parents no longer have to suppress their child's sexuality. What happens in the homes of children who identify as LGBT in opposition's paradigm? Given that education is strongly linked to the dynamic in a household, especially in this debate, because LGBT kids in their paradigm will come home crying and cut themselves because they are exposed to homophobic straight children who are bullying them, we think that majority of the reactions of parents in these households is that they are going to try to convince their child to change, that their sexuality is something that will not be accepted until it is put into the straight norm. This happens because there is no support system to put their children in, and that's exactly what we're supporting. Why is this so harmful? To convince your child that it's not good for you to be gay and that you should only be straight for you to be accepted. We say that firstly, it disrupts the child's growth and acceptance of his homosexuality. It makes him feel not equal, it disrupts his growth, and we think it's incredibly harmful for your internal growth. We will feel like shit, and we don't want that to happen to LGBT kids. Please tell me on their side exactly what the benefit of having LGBT kids in a sphere where they will be bullied good, right? But secondly, we say that you create a household on their side that is only tolerant of the straight norm. And we think that given that states and the LGBT communities and the movement itself supports integration and supports the fact that we have to treat these homosexuals as equal, we shouldn't be perpetuating and propagating the fact that on their side they have households that only propagate straight norms and force these kids into them. So for all these reasons and more, for the reasons that on their side, kids are more bullied and are more likely to feel like crap, we are very glad to help these LGBT children.
The very sole purpose of the LGBT movement itself is to have integration within society, is for society to accept them. But what they're trying to do to solve this problem is to segregate them completely from society, telling society that these LGBTs are not normal, they cannot associate with straight people, and therefore they should be put into a school far, far away where they have their special support systems, right? We tell you that this will further exacerbate the situation because they say that they want to stop bullying. But we've already told you that bullying can never be stopped completely. And we tell you that this will still happen in the first place. Because bullying can be boiled down to something as simple as not wanting to associate with this other person, right? Because just because you stop bullying itself doesn't mean that you're teaching society to accept them in the first place. By separating them, this will further exacerbate the situation because now you're sending a message to society, LGBTs cannot mix with normal people, they're not normal, they need special help, and therefore we put them into special schools. What side tried to prove to you today was how tolerance comes with maturity. And we tell you that this is false. Because even if when you bring these people into special schools and when they're not exposed to them at all, we tell you that this causes a long-term harm when you release these LGBTQs into society, into the workforce, where straight people will further discriminate them. Because they're not exposed to them at all, they don't know who they are, they don't know what they do. So instead of being able to accept them better when they're mature,
We tell you that this will not happen in the first place because they don't know who they are, they don't know what they do, and they don't know how to be able to accept them in the first place, right? We analyze the role and the sole purpose of schools in the first place. What schools do is that they bring together people from diverse cultures and people who are different in order for them to have an avenue to understand one another, to the things they do, to group discussions, and so on and so forth, right? By segregating these people completely, this will stop. This will delay the integration of these people into society, into the society, because it sends a wrong message to them. Because what within their paradigm, what they're doing is that they're sending these people away. They're telling society that these people are weirdos, that we cannot accept them, and then in the end, people within these normal schools will then think that these people will then make assumptions of what these people do within LGBT schools and say that yes, we send them away because they're weirdos. They do weird stuff within their own schools. This is why we cannot accept them. When what they try to prove to you is how counseling within status quo is not working. We tell you that this is a step-by-step process which we have to go and understand, right? But putting these LGBTs with normal society will be able to observe what they do, be able to just slowly accept them into society because they see and they understand one another through group discussions, to learning with one another, right? Our burden today is not to prove to you how we will completely stop bullying. Our burden is to prove to you how within the long term, society will soon be able to accept them slowly into society because they know that you are one of us and we can study with you, we can associate with you. This is why you will further be accepted into society. What they wanted to prove to you is how these people will not feel equal when they fight with these people within normal schools, right? But when you further segregate them, this will further exacerbate the situation because now you're giving them a different avenue where people will start to segregate and you're not equal to us. You're not normal. You need special needs. This is why you're in normal schools. This will make them to feel a further sense of inequality because you segregate them into extra special schools and at the cost of their future. Even when they say they want to give these people quality education without bullying and so on and so forth, right? We tell you that this is false because when you in the future, when you release them into society, when you release them into the working world, people are going to further segregate them because they don't understand what they do. They're not able to associate with them. They aren't even exposed to what they do in the first place, right? You give them a quality education at the cost of at the cost of their own future, and we think that this is very harmful. Moving on to my substantive on how it sends a wrong message to society, right? You're telling society, or you're telling these gay people, we have to keep you away from society because we don't want you to infect the straight kids. We don't want you to associate with them because we're scared that you will turn these straight people gay. This is extremely harmful because these LGBTs themselves think that the government does not accept them as normal society, do not believe that they have equal rights, right? Next, on the perspective of parents itself, when other parts of society know that the parents send them to these special schools, then they will start to discriminate these parents. You're irresponsible by sending your children to these kind of LGBT schools. You're irresponsible for not trying to curb them from being homosexual, and this is extremely harmful to the LGBT movement because you're now telling them you cannot send your children there because you're not caring for them as an adult. Next, so we tell you that it is not in the best interest of the LGBT society in the first place because the sole purpose of the LGBT community is to be able to integrate with normal society, is to be a part of society in the first place. And we tell you that by segregating them into these special schools, radicals, for example, people who don't like LGBTs, it becomes an easier avenue for them to attack. Like, for example, radicals who don't like LGBTs can just go to these schools and start attack them and bomb them, for example, just because they don't like LGBTs. Before I move on, yes.
So you're saying to push the interest for the LGBT movement, it's justified to use these children as social battlegrounds for the discrimination within the classroom.
We tell you that bullying will never stop, right? Even when you segregate them into extra schools. In fact, you are making it worse by putting them into special schools because you're now telling society that we cannot accept them completely. You're harming you're harming the entire LGBT community by thinking that you're doing something good in the first place, right? And we tell you that no, we're not putting these children as an avenue for other people to bully them. In fact, we're telling society that yes, they can be a part of you, they can learn together with you, and you're forced to accept them into society because they're also a part of us, right? And besides that, we also tell you how in the long term, this becomes an avenue for normalization. Because when you put these people in the same par as the straight kids, right? We tell you that this will become an avenue for normalization. Why? On the first level, because we have to study with them, they have to work together with them. They're able to understand the ways, their cultures, what they do in schools and societies, and it gives them adequate exposure and tell them that yes, these people exist within their society. They're a part of your family now, and you have to learn to accept them as your classmates. You have to learn to accept them as friends. And we tell you that support systems will still exist within these schools because counseling still exists. These teachers will still be there, right? Even if they want to argue to you that counseling does not work, we tell you that it does, because within society themselves, people are starting to accept these homosexuals. People are starting to understand what the LGBTs do, and we tell you that within our paradigm, LGBTs can integrate into society. LGBTs are a part of us.
If it wasn't clear for side opposition, this debate was about the children who would walk the halls and constantly be ridiculed just for the mere fact that they are gay. This debate was also for the students whose heads have been shoved in toilets by people who refuse to accept their sexuality. Because we have to recognize that these children have special needs. And we have to recognize that we can't keep living in this utopia they tell us. Because the opposition side can't have their cake and eat it too. They can't tell us that society is ready to accept them when they escalate the harms of bullying by separating them. And that's why they think this contradiction in their context is simply why their rhetoric and their logic is invalid. Two very simple points of justification to why the government side takes this debate. First being on a micro issue. Let's deal with the principal justifications both sides brought to you. Because we have to ask this question. Is creating an exclusive LGBT school aligned with giving these students better education? This is where we have to heavily criticize this principle coming from the leader of the opposition. The whole idea that society will further isolate them when you separate them, an argument shared by the previous speaker. To which we say, firstly, that's not true. The state recognizes you can't merely use children as social battering rams when it sees an immediate necessary goal, and that's to provide you a conducive environment for you to take in this idea of education to begin with. That's the same logic why we give people who have mental illness special types of education. And that's why we have private education, because we recognize we have students who have special needs that can be best addressed through these structures. But the second level of response is this. Even if we somehow isolate them, isolation from a world that reduces you to your sexuality and harms you on the basis of that is much more harmful from isolating you within a community that is ready to accept you because of your similarities. And that's likely where this whole rhetoric on discourse can unfold, when you have people willing to engage and get to know you when they don't have predisposed ideas from you. That's why it was so important for our Prime Minister to give you the argument on the LGBT schools that provide the most conducive learning environment. We get this really annoying rhetoric from them that what's so special about this type of difference? It's the whole idea that, it's something that you cannot physically change and something spiritually within you. Your sexuality that people constantly try to change is something we're trying to protect and not suppress. But to formally respond to this whole idea on bullying, that it will always happen on both sides, firstly, it's dramatically lessened on our side where you have bullying, because we think of bullying as a result of people highlighting your difference, and in your case, it's people who are straight bullying those who are gay because they aren't similar. And that's the whole idea on diversity from them being taken down. Because that's why in a public school, you have constant people who cannot put themselves to sleep and who do not want to learn anymore because they find it unnecessary and not effective. But the second level of response is this.
Even if bullying can happen on your side, the propensity is much lessened when you have people who aren't going to ridicule you because they are gay for you being gay to begin with. So this whole rhetoric on bullying from them cannot hold true. But my last point of rebuttal coming from this side is this barely argued point from this previous speaker. The whole idea that the message you give society is that these people are different and you are going to infect straight people, that's why you're separating them. Firstly, there's a difference between a hospital where people try to treat you in an educational facility. We tell you that firstly, conversely, why are they trying to be separated to begin with? You have people reducing them for the mere fact that they are homosexuals and you have a hard time for them to be seen. The message you send these children is that they too deserve a conducive learning environment for them truly to be educated. So the second level of response is even if you send that message as well, the message they send is much more harmful. That's why it was so important for a Deputy Prime Minister to give you your argument on strategic integration, because we aren't giving up the idea of integration. We think that it's more strategic for you to integrate within a society of adults where people recognize that you don't no longer have these predisposed ideas that children are accustomed to, something they never really adequately responded to. So let's resolve that issue very quickly. We think these children do deserve a conducive learning environment, something exclusively attained from our side. But before my second issue, go.
Within your paradigm, establishing these special schools in the first place, you're going to further encourage segregation because now people in normal schools will then force people with LGBTs to enter these kind of schools just because they cannot accept them with their society.
That leads me on perfectly to my second issue, because we get this rhetoric coming from them that people are going to target them and you collectively put them in one institution. Perfectly to my second issue, on a macro issue, on pragmatic benefits. Is this aligned with the best interest of the student? This is where we address her point when we take down the leader of the opposition's argument. This whole clamor on the whole collection makes them an easier target. To which we say, firstly, that's simply an assertive push that you cannot say under your context. Because if they're going to give us a context of acceptance and people are ready to accept you, why then will people who are from another school go out of their way just to laugh at you at your school and just to bully you? So they can't give us this whole acceptance rhetoric when they say that people will go out of their way just to bully you. So the second level of response is even if you force them to belong in society, we think conversely, they have an appropriate condition for them to develop within their own society. That society of people who are like them. That society of people who will not reduce them to their sexuality because they recognize that they can be more than that. That's why it was so important for us to give you the argument on the most effective support systems. Because it's essential for these people who are going through sensitive things like figuring out their sexuality to have people to support them as well. We're talking about their fellow students. We're talking about their classmates who give them an avenue to be accepted within their society. But my last point of rebuttal is this whole idea coming from the deputy leader of the opposition. The shared premise on an avenue for normalization. To which we say it cannot happen when you are unwilling to open your mind as a child. Because we see that as a child, you are accustomed to certain things, particularly like this. Normalization won't happen when people continue to shun you, when people continue to see that you are different, when people are continuously neglecting the idea that you are different. But the second level response is this. That's not mutually exclusive because that's why we want to equip people with education first so that when they grow up, they can see that people should be welcome as well. That's why it was so important for us to give you a pragmatic argument on creating a better family dynamic when you don't have parents suppressing the sexuality of their children, something they never really adequately responded to. Because there's all this rhetoric on how status quo is already enough is not enough, because we told you that if they're going to accept the status quo is enough, that all their harms should then fall. We win this issue because we proved to you that it is in the best interest of the student to do this, because we recognize that integration is a value better attained when we go at the strategy of doing it from a later time. And for all those reasons and more, I've never been prouder to propose.
Mr. Speaker, the lads on side government here today make me sick to the bone when they come up here and tell me that it's okay, whatever we're doing, it's going to help them for maybe 2 or 3 years. It's going to help this LGBT community for maybe 2 or 3 years, but in the end, it's just going to come back to a neutral standpoint where they are, in the end, segregated and discriminated as well. But first of all, a few rebuttals coming from outside. Because first, they come up here and tell you how, by segregating these individuals, it makes it a more conducive environment for their education. Nobody said that they cannot learn or they cannot maintain a conducive environment in regular schools. Because the main problem in today's debate, the main reason why it's so messy is because these individuals, the lads on side government today, act as if there are absolutely no controls in school, that there are no rules, that there are no laws to abide for, that there are no measures taken to punish individuals who oppose these kind of people, who make fun of these kind of people. Because when they ride on that assumption, well then, sit down. Discrimination happens to almost everyone. Let me pose the question to your side. Why is discrimination apparently only happening towards LGBT individuals? Why isn't discrimination suddenly non-existent in regular schools towards African American peoples, towards short peoples, towards Muslims in certain societies? You're acting as if the only form of insult or the only form of discrimination is towards these individuals who are lesbians, gays, bisexuals, or transsexuals. And then you come up here and say it's sit down. It's the most effective way to help these individuals, as if they were a disease in the first place. Because they come up here and say that, because we come up here and say that that doesn't mean you need a specific school for it. Once again, linking back to the fact that you are assuming that there are no controls and that there are no measures at all. My first speaker came up here and said that yes, bullying will never stop. That doesn't mean that everyone is still going to bully you. It's just sit down. It's just a matter of maybe one or two individuals. What he said was he wants a marginal benefit from this, a marginal difference between discrimination and not discriminating them. Basically saying that we are going to reduce bullying, what they clearly misunderstood. Moving on, they come up here, sit down. They come up here and argue to us. They use this rhetoric as a word they so likely use, right? Of battering rams, sit down. How long can we let these individuals be in high schools and become battering rams for social norms? Well, one level of response to that, why are you still acting as if there is no measure or control towards this? These individuals are not going to become battering rams because that's a complete extreme of it, where everyone is shunning these individuals. Sit down. You have conceded to the fact that status quo does accept these individuals, but what you're doing is exaggerating the problem and saying that these individuals need a special school all of a sudden, where it's so bad up to a point where we need a divide, where the majority of heterosexual people hate to the core these individuals and that they cannot go to school together. Moving on, you come up here and say that under your paradigm, bullying is reduced. We tell you no, and you say that, oh, when you say you cannot bully something that isn't around you. Well, examine the topic of war, examine the topic of fights. Most of the time, you're not fighting with individuals who are part of you, who are one of you, with an institution with you. You go and pick fights with other people. Sit down. Right now, you've just segregated all of them, put them into one school, and basically say, guys, as a school now, let's unite and hate these individuals. As compared to putting one individual in the system where there are controls and measures. Sit down. For example, anti-bullying campaigns later. Now, you cannot. What we want to say at the end of the day is basically this: how our side provides a conducive environment to still learn. Because one thing is, besides learning, putting in your own hard work and effort towards your own studies, we say it's a conducive environment because you are exposed to straight people, which is a benefit on your side, and how we can educate the straight people at the same time to not discriminate you. Because in the end, you're still in school, and like what you're saying, basically, you cannot bully something that's not around you, but you can learn from something that is around you. Sit down. And the fact that you are putting it to the extreme where you say they are battering rams is illogical because you've clearly misunderstood status quo. Now, to bring up a point, no, not to bring up, sit down. To bring to consideration something is this. Basically, the difference between educating these individuals separately as compared to educating them collectively. Because we see educating them collectively provides avenues for everyone to learn. In lieu with the LGBT movement, for individuals to accept them, for them to integrate themselves, sit down, into society. And basically, what happens when you educate them separately is, that's it, you educate them separately, and they are two complete different people who cannot work together. But The fact is they are still from the same community sit down. They have to have integration in the future. So you may have delayed the bullying now, but your paradigm causes more bullying in the future on a more serious level at work, where individuals hinder you from getting more opportunities to provide bread for your children at home. Now, before that,
Say will have normal schools to actively target homosexuals in their schools to give us a context in society already accepting you. Because in that particular case,
exactly why we are arguing against the creation of these schools, why we don't support the creation of these things in the first place. If you don't provide the avenue for these individuals to do so, they are not going to do so. Understood? Now, moving on to basically the clash points in today's topic. 3 actually. Bullying, exposure and the level of maturity, and when we can integrate these individuals into society, and societal acceptance. Under the topic of bullying, how they get bullied in school, once again they write on the assumption that there are no measures and there are no controls towards bullying, and bullying is something so bad that no one, absolutely no one, not even expulsion, suspension or hitting with a cane can solve. Now, on the second clash, and what we say to this is basically bullying, we will reduce bullying way more than what their side is going to do, which is create more platforms for bullying, collective targeting, for example. Now, in the long term, even if your proposal stops bullying, what about this individual future? What about this individual's future, basically? You cannot bully what's there. Yes, we agree. But then again, you're going to bully these individuals when they grow up. Because one, you're not used to these individuals. These individuals aren't used to you. You cannot be openly gay in front of people who've never seen people who are openly gay. How are you going to expect them to basically accept you? Because it's like a practical thing in real life. Although generally they can accept you, it's not practiced yet. You need to give these individuals exposure and to practice this acceptance. Understood? Now, moving on to the second clash point, exposure and the level of maturity, and how they say when it's older, it's better. We say no. You should learn from high school itself to accept these people and learn with these individuals. Basically, societal acceptance is when at the end of the day, how our paradigm solves the problem of bullying and how we provide a better society to accept these individuals, because that's what we want at the end of the day. They can still learn no matter what. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, top 5.
There are 3 burdens that government side failed to prove today. Firstly is the burden of whether gays can be more accepted within society. Secondly, what is the best interest of the LGBTs? And lastly, the harms and benefits against these LGBT people. But let's take a look at the first burden which they failed to prove. Whether these gays can be more accepted within society. Because what they told us is that, because what they don't understand is that when a gay is present in our lives, when an LGBT student is present in the lives of society, it acts like a normalization for them to learn to accept them, or for them to learn of the LGBT's ways. If the LGBT people are not present within their lives, how would they then learn to accept these people? How would they learn how to adapt towards them, or how do they learn to coincide with them? They can't learn this from Wikipedia, or they can't learn this from education, right? But next, what is the best interest of this LGBT? Because they told us 2 things, and they said this is the 2 very dramatic harms, right? Firstly, they said that we want to stop bullying because bullying is so detrimental in schools and everything. Because we believe this is a misconception coming from their side. Because we explicitly told you that bullying will never cease to exist. Because you will also be discriminated in the workforce. You will also be discriminated when you go older. Like what my whip said, you were only protected for the period of time you are studying in a high school. What happens when you go for tertiary education? What happens when you go into the workforce? If you were this same society and you are friends with this society, people will then be more acceptance of you. We're not saying that people will 100% accept you. We're saying that there is a marginal benefits towards this, and that's a stance that I put forth in my speech already. But next, they talk about the quality of education and how the quality of education on their side will be guarded. It will be like a sanctity, right? We believe that's false, right? This is very biased coming from their side. Be it whether you're saying that these people are internally gay, whether these people are gay or not gay, because there are also people who are black. There are also people who are Asian. You can't change it. And I quote the whip speaker. He said, you can't change your appearance. You can't change your preferences, right? So So are you saying, so why don't you isolate everyone that is discriminated and everyone that is bullied before? Why don't you create schools for the black people? Why don't you create schools for the Asian people, right? Since you're saying that bullying is so harmful, right? But next, on conducive environments, we already told you there are measures in school already, in my speech itself. There are measures in school. There are laws which govern how you govern bullying in school, right? Because you cannot, you don't simply assume that a teacher will let a student simply bully a kid. There will always be measures and there will always be laws. You isolating them won't do much, right? But let's say, even if bullying is decreased or halted in your paradigm, it won't do much because it's only in the short term. The long-term prospect of accepting this case is non-existent within your paradigm, but there is a potential in our case. But next, on the harms or benefits, because we told you two things with something which they never tackle on. Firstly, we believe that these gays have to openly show their gayness towards the society. They want to show that they are who they are and they like who they like, right? But isolating them means that you don't let them be openly gay to society, you let them be openly gay towards the LGBT community itself only, not towards society. Because you're saying that then bullying would happen. That's why we have to isolate them, right? And that's something wrong coming from that side. But next, this will create more avenue for further discrimination for these people. Because now since there are schools built especially for them, so these people will be pressured to go there. Society will then say, look, you don't belong here, you're not one of us, you're a gay, you should go to that school or you should go on that side of the room there, right? But in conclusion, what has opposition told you today? Opposition has told you many things on why gays want to be integrated within society. They don't want to be isolated from society. They want to be more generally accepted. And next, we also told you that bullying can never cease to exist, right? Even though how much you want to stop bullying, it will never stop. Also, we talk about discrimination. If you think that discrimination is so bad, why don't you isolate everyone, right? We also told you that the quality of education would be guarded and would be preserved also under our paradigm, especially coming from a weak speaker. And with that, I am proud to vote.
Opposition generally was extremely assumptive with their arguments because they worked in a vacuum that was extremely and completely ignorant of the context we're working in. Because, ladies and gentlemen, our speeches in government were very clear with the clear problem in this debate. That integration in a classroom context will never work with a very homophobic society. Because, guys, inevitably, you cannot expect acceptance to happen within a classroom just because you put them in the same class. That was the huge logical leap that came from opposition, which they failed to build on, right? But even if it will work, our response was very simple. We said that you must never be able to use them as social battering rams. And that's why that new push from the opposition whip and their reply, which that their model is a long-term solution, should never be accepted, right? Because we told you that clear problems and clear and present problems of discrimination must be targeted now and not waited on by the state just because you want the interest of the LGBT movement we put forward. Two contentions to prove we're going to win. Firstly, how do we fulfill the purpose of schools? And secondly, how do we have integration? To the first one, how do we fulfill the purpose of schools? Because before we talk about acceptance, which they immediately argued into, we need to look back at the standard we brought to you from the very first speech about education. And it was very simple, that you must be able to create a conducive learning environment for every single student for their effective formation in the future when they grow up to get a job and to be able to integrate with the rest of everyone. What did the opposition bring to us? Opposition told us that no, people won't bully them because there is some sort of acceptance anyways. In the same breath, they say that it's an endemic reality. That huge contradiction from their side was something that they failed to be able to prove to us, which is exactly true. Why was this response inefficient? Because we said that we'd like to already err on the side of caution and say that we need a private institution, that the status quo doesn't work, that the discrimination is very rampant in society, even to the emotional extent of these children, within the mindsets that when they're isolated from the rest of society, within breaks, within recess and lunch, then there has to be something that the state must do. And that's creating a private institution for them, to separate them, to protect them from all these bullies. We don't want to call it isolation. We want to call it protection for these individuals. But even if bullying is endemic, our response is very simple, coming from the whip, right? We need to develop their community such that we don't discriminate them anyways. That when you have this type of special school for them to recognize who they are, the purpose of schools is for them to be able to understand themselves and to be able to develop a community to strengthen the LGBT movement in the long run. That's why it's extremely inefficient for them to just continuously assert their arguments and not compare whether or not this is going to be true in the first place. So in line with the purpose of schools, our side is going to win that issue. Second one. How do we have integration, right? And this is where I'm going to more engage upon their assertive arguments. Because it was completely assertive for them to push their arguments without comparing which integration is more likely, right? Because you can't just force acceptance by putting them in the same classroom. At best, they said that probably they'll work together in group projects, which is extremely assumptive because I already preempted that in my first speech. That within group projects, you always have this inherent mindset within individuals that they're going to call you a faggot, that they're going to call you someone that is less worth because you're just not straight, right? And you're not conforming to the rest of us. And with that same mindset, you cannot be able to easily change that, and you just cannot do that in this type of context. And that's why that's why there were so many logical leaps in their case, right? What did we bring to you? We told you that there must be a strategic form of integration, right? And all these responses came from my deputy and whip, right? That when you look at it, when you target the families within the household where values are formed, wherein people tell them to come out or tell them to join these schools in the first place, we create an environment where they can be protected and a safe support center or some support groups where we can make sure that they can be in it in the first place. Because we told you, and this is the conclusion of this case, normalization won't happen when you have an environment that always continues the norm. And for all you saying more, I am very proud to host my show.
Right, also shake hands on